Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mr. TARDIS, and we're here at what appears to be the end of the First Doctor Big Finish trilogy, where Stephen Noonan's First Doctor meets a bunch of classic series companions. For those of you who don't know, in 2022 they recast the role of the First Doctor in Big Finish audios. Stephen Noonan's playing the First Doctor, Lauren Cornelius is playing companion Dodo, and we got two box sets with the First Doctor and Dodo, The Outlaws and The Demon Song, and these were really strong standalone box sets. But since then we've had now a trilogy of stories where Stephen Noonan's First Doctor is meeting classic companions, but now they've been aged up and we're figuring out what happened to them after their adventures with the First Doctor. We have Maureen O'Brien in Fugitive of the Daleks, Peter Purves in The Living Darkness, and now Anneke Wills in Beware the City of Illusions, which is what we're talking about today. This story is written by Nicholas Briggs, and conceptually it's probably the most interesting of the three in terms of this trilogy, because while Vicky and Stephen had a history with the First Doctor, at this point in the First Doctor's story where he's travelling alone with Dodo, he hasn't met Polly yet. Because if you remember, the First Doctor meets Polly and also fellow companion Ben in the same story that Dodo departs in, The War Machines. So this seems like an interesting way to try and get the square peg to fit in the round hole in like a story capacity, if that makes sense. And in terms of whether or not Beware the City of Illusions makes the most of that premise, we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's talk about the premise of the story. So Beware the City of Illusions takes place primarily on the brand new futuristic city of Arcadia, except it's not the future, it's the present day. At least I think it's the present day. It's approximate to the present day. And the city of Arcadia is a pilot project. It's a hidden city that no one can access from the outside, and it runs on some strange alien renewable energy. Because at this point in the Whoniverse timeline, it has now become financially impossible to sustain the planet's growth and resources through fossil fuels, so they're now forced to embrace renewable energies. However, the government want to make sure that Arcadia is safe, so who do they send? They send Polly, played by Anneke Wills, because in her old age she is now a campaigner and activist for renewable energies and looking after the planet. So the government's goal is that if this campaigner can see the value of Arcadia, then we can roll out this project and we can save the country. However, on Polly's way into the city, along with fellow companion Lilia, played by Anna Critchlow, they stumble across a delirious and barely conscious First Doctor, and they take him to Arcadia as well in order to investigate the city. However, all is not what it seems. There's a bunch of government conspiracies going on. We also have a slightly older Dodo here who has managed to infiltrate the government and is trying to figure out what is behind Arcadia, where they're getting their fuel source for, and who is the mysterious Mr. Hammond.
And, you say you painted all 6 of these today?
Yes, when I was in the employment zone, in this light bubble thing.
Light bubble? Well...
But that's not all, Doctor.
Not all? What do you mean?
Before today, I couldn't paint. I mean, well, I'd tried once or twice over the years, but I was just terrible at it.
But these are... well, they're really quite remarkable.
Oh, Doctor, it's so lovely to see you again. And you haven't changed a bit. I mean, you haven't changed a bit from when I first knew you. Oh, that's a point. How come...
It's child. Before you go on, I'm afraid that I have a confession to make.
A confession? About what?
Well, let me put it this way. I can see quite clearly that you recognize me. Yes, that's plain to see. I think if you were lying, I would know. Yes, I would know.
Why would I lie?
Beware the City of Illusions is a 6-part story, and what I'm going to say up front is that I don't think it needed to be a 6-part story. That's basically the case for a lot of Big Finish 6-part stories at this point, but I think what Fugitive of the Daleks and The Living Darkness did to somewhat alleviate that, that these are 6-part stories that maybe don't need to be, is that when you get to parts 4 and 5, something big happens that fundamentally changes the structure of the story, so it basically gives the story a second wind for the last 2 episodes. Beware the City of Illusions doesn't really have that. And also, one thing that's quite an issue with the story is the timing of the release, because it was only a month prior that the Ninth Doctor Adventures released Cloud 8, and it deals with a lot of similar themes as Beware the City of Illusions. It's basically got the same conceit and the same mystery at the heart of it, although Beware the City of Illusions is much more interested in the government aspect of it. But Cloud 8 isn't even an hour long, whereas Beware the City of Illusions is about 3 hours long, and it just feels like Cloud 8 is a much more efficient story for what it's trying to tell. However, what I will say is that Beware the City of Illusions has got a really big cast. There's a lot of characters here to juggle, and they did feel really distinct and memorable. With the exception of Polly's friend Lillian, I sometimes just forgot that she was in the story, and then she just pop up every so often, and I was, oh, you're still here, okay. We've got Mr. Gint, played brilliantly by Barnaby Edwards. We've got David Danes, played by Tom Alexander, and there's a really fun dynamic between Dave and the First Doctor, where the First Doctor just instantly sees right through Dave and the type of person he is and just instantly hates him. And the way Stephen Newton plays him, because the way he says Dave, he's such a git. But yeah, Mr. Gint and Dave have a really good double act dynamic. It kind of reminded me of Revelation of the Daleks, which is a story basically built on double acts. It's kind of on that level. But I really like how Nicholas Briggs characterizes the First Doctor in this story. I think it's a script where he can really have his cake and eat it too, where you have a character like Dave, where the First Doctor is able to be childish and crotchety, like we love this version of the First Doctor. But also, because this takes place towards the end of his life, near the end of his TV series story, we are able to see the more mellow and compassionate grandfatherly figure when he's talking to characters like Polly and Dodo. Here we're able to have the best of both worlds, and I do like how Nicholas Briggs characterizes the Doctor. And as usual, I think Stephen Noonan is just terrific in this role. I think he's really gone from strength to strength portraying the Doctor, and Beware the City of Illusions, I think it's his best performance yet. I think he's really, really strong. And while I think Beware the City of Illusions is too long a story, I don't really think it sustains the 6 parts. I think because of its length, I think it is able to tell an interesting story about hierarchies, both moral and bureaucratic. You've got the situation in the future where fossil fuels are too expensive, so there's an economic need for renewables. So the Secretary of State of Energies, J.J. Radcliffe, played by Amy Roxon, is working for the Prime Minister to get the Arcadia project approved, so they bring in Polly to defer the decision to her. So there's like a clear hierarchy of command there. But the Prime Minister is also working for/with Mr. Hammond, who is using the cities to siphon this energy. However, it turns out that Hammond has his own reasons for wanting to siphon this energy, and minor spoilers, it's basically so he can pay off debts to another race of aliens who consider any life form that's not like them as a lower form of life. And then on top of that, Mr. Hammond's species possesses these creatures called the Tertiaryx and is able to mind control them to do their bidding, and that just adds another branch to the hierarchy. I think that Beware the City of Illusions is telling a pretty interesting story about these hierarchies and how control and responsibility and blame just gets deferred further and further down in order to absolve people of guilt. And when you have this theme about who is responsible for your actions, what motivated you to do what you do, there's a really nice emotional beat in part 6 revolving around Polly and this Tertiaryx species here, and I thought that was really effective. But we're kind of dancing around the main topic of this whole story, and that's Polly herself, because despite the compliments I have to pay to the story, very few of them have to do with Polly. I think it's conceptually very interesting to have a companion that the Doctor hasn't met yet, following on from the reunions with Vicky and Stephen in the previous stories, but this story mainly just coasts on Polly coming back, and that's kind of it. There's not many interactions or meaningful interactions between Polly and the Doctor, with the exception of part 2, where they establish the nature of this reunion, but then after that, nothing else really happens to test the dynamic. There's no testing of whether or not the Doctor or Polly can be trusted, because Polly claims to know the Doctor, but can the Doctor really trust her? They don't even flirt with that idea. Polly just becomes a surrogate companion character that you'd get in like solo Doctor adventures like Joy to the World or The Runaway Bride. And while there is merit to that, imagine if in the revived series we got to Partners in Crime, but there's a single scene reminding us who Donna Noble is, or there's this character from The Runaway Bride, but then there's nothing else in that story building on that original dynamic from that story, and then as we get to the end of the story, the two barely even get a meaningful goodbye, or I don't know, it's a bit of an odd one. Now, I understand that Polly is not like Stephen and Vicky at this point in the Doctor's story. Like I said, the Doctor hasn't met her yet, but maybe you could really play with that, make that the unique angle of the story. And for what it's worth, I think Annika Wills is good in this story, and I think in terms of her character in and of herself, I think she's really put through the ringer emotionally in this story. She does get a lot to do, but it does feel like she is just another supporting character in this story. But if you're listening to this, you know that that's not the case. She's Polly. And it's also kind of a big deal that Annika Wills is back playing this role. She hasn't returned to this role, or Big Finish generally, in about 7 to 8 years. So this has been a long time coming. And then there's not actually much going on between her and the Doctor in this story. And then you also have the awkward placement of Dodo, because what do you do with Dodo in this story? Oh, she's gone undercover at the government and she's slightly older now? Okay, but I don't really know when this is set. I don't know how she got here. It just feels like there's a lot of missing pieces here, despite this, once again, being a 3-hour-long story. But as you'd expect with a Nicholas Briggs script, it is bombastic. It does play with camp tone sometimes, with, you know, big eccentric action sequences and chases, and the Doctor gets into a helicopter and a flying machine and starts having a really fun time with it. And I think the cast rise up to the challenge of performing a really energetic script. It's a fun 6-parter, but I don't know if it needed to be 6 parts, and I do wish that Polly got a bit more to do emotionally within the story, especially in terms of this unknown relationship with the First Doctor. I think that this story has really missed a trick here, and I understand that it's difficult because it's not the same as Stephen and Vicky, but then they should have really leaned into that difference, and I don't really think they did here. So at time of recording this video, we don't have a follow-up story announced. I'm not sure if this is the end of the trilogy or if they're going to continue for a 4th story, maybe get Carol Ann Ford in as Susan for another companion reunion, or if they're going to go standalone First Doctor and Dodo adventures again, like with the Outlaws and the Demons song. I'm kind of looking forward to when we do get these standalone stories again. You know, as fun as this trip down memory lane has been, I do want to see Stephen Newton and Lauren Cornelius be offered the opportunity to make their own stamp on these characters and in the Doctor Who universe. But in the meanwhile, that's my review of Beware the City of Illusions. Let me know your thoughts on the story if you've listened to it in the comment section below. Hit the like button, subscribe, all that good stuff, and folks, I'll see you all next time.